Canon R5 Mark II is an amazing camera when it comes to filmmaking. With a whole new set of features designed specifically for filmmakers, the Canon R5 Mark II has easily become my go-to camera for professional shoots as well as for personal use. I previously shared a video on the biggest downfalls of this camera, but in this video I want to highlight what makes it so special and why I actually still keep it and use it for myself. So here are 6 reasons why you should buy the Canon R5 Mark II as a filmmaker. Hi, my name is Bruno Pozo. I'm a full-time commercial filmmaker here in Bend, Oregon. I make weekly videos on filmmaking techniques, gear, and how to make money with your camera. Like and subscribe if you're into any of that. Now, the first reason you'd want to upgrade to the Canon R5 Mark II is for C-Log2. This is what originally drew me to the camera because C-Log2 is Canon's best log curve, which just simply gives us the most dynamic range. And if you're unfamiliar with what dynamic range is, it's your camera's ability to see into the dark parts of a scene all the way into the bright parts. And so if you have a camera with poor dynamic range, you'll see that you end up with really dark parts of your image really easily or really bright parts of your image really easily. So an easy example is a high contrast situation like shooting outdoors. With the Canon R5 Mark II's C-Log2 dynamic range, you can see all the detail on these dark shadowy areas here, as well as those bright parts into the sky, almost looking directly into the sun. I'll switch over to the standard profile and you'll see that even at the same exact settings that the sky clips a lot sooner and the dark parts of the image get darker much quicker. So the fact that we have C-Log2 finally in a mirrorless camera from Canon is huge because this is the first time they've ever released that log curve outside of their cinema line of cameras. This allows us to create a more cinematic look where we can see more details in the shadows and the highlights, as well as a more natural highlight roll off so that it doesn't just clip suddenly out of nowhere, and just all around gives you better detail. Now, another reason why I decided to pick up this camera is actually a feature that was added to the Canon R6 Mark II, and that's the removal of a record limit. Previously on Canon cameras, they had a record limit of 29 minutes and 59 seconds, so effectively 30 minutes. And if you recorded anything longer than that, you would have to hit record again immediately after that timer was done so that you wouldn't miss anything. And so if you ever done long videos, like let's say for a ceremony at a wedding or a podcast setup or someone speaking on stage, having to constantly check the cameras and make sure they're recording ahead of their 30-minute limit was super annoying and stressful. So I'm really glad that Canon has come out of that arbitrary limit and updated it to be pretty much until either the card fills up, the camera overheats, or the battery dies. And because I actually do a decent amount of long form content outside of just YouTube, but for some of my clients in terms of podcasting and event marketing, this was really needed, and I really appreciate the fact that this camera has no recording limit. Now, the next reason I decided to pick up this camera is for its 8K sensor and incredibly sharp 4K. This camera downsamples its 8K sensor to 4K when recording in 24p or 30p. Luckily for me, about 90% of my content is shot in those frame rates, and so I get to take full advantage of this feature, and I have loved the image that comes out of this camera. This is referred to as 4K fine mode, which just means it's downsampling from the full sensor. There is an unfine mode, which I try to avoid because the image is definitely a lot softer in that setting. But luckily, I only really need to go into that mode for 60 frames and up. But I have been experimenting with using S-RAW, which is the 4K RAW, and that has been really sharp for those situations where I do want a sharp 60 frames per second or more. So if 4K video is important to you and you shoot in 24 or 30 frames per second, you're gonna love the image quality out of this camera. Now, one of the craziest reasons I decided to pick up this camera is because this thing can actually record 8K RAW internally. This uses the full resolution of its sensor to capture 12-bit video. Now, this is really expensive and is going to heat up the camera really quickly, but if you do have the cooling grip and you do have a fast enough CF Express Type B card, recording raw video on this camera is really cool. Not only does it give you the flexibility to adjust settings in post-production like the ISO and white balance without distorting the image, it also future-proofs this camera, so this is one that you can pretty much keep on your shelf for a pretty long time and still take advantage of all of its features. And what's even cooler is they have an option for 4K RAW, so if you don't need that whole 8K resolution, which, let's be honest, is overkill, you have the 4K option, which allows you to even go up to 60p. The 4K RAW option is more than enough for most people, and you still get all those benefits of the RAW video, just with a slightly less resolution and smaller file size. And it's really easy to work with these RAW files because you can adjust the settings on the camera to actually record the RAW file to the CF Express card and then record a proxy directly to the SD card, so that when you transfer the files to your computer, you can immediately work off the proxies and get to editing without having to wait to create those proxies or anything like that. The workflow is super seamless. Now, this next feature is something that I've been waiting for so long, and I think more cameras need to have it, and that's LUT support directly inside of the camera. This camera has a lot of customization when it comes to the picture profiles, and one of the options you have in that customization is the ability to actually bake in a LUT. This is great for quick turnaround projects where you don't want to go through the whole process of color correcting and color grading, and instead you can quickly bake that into the video file and then send it off for delivery to your client. I also like to use this setting as a way to preview the exposure of my image, and then I'll actually turn it off so I don't bake it into the file, because I still like having the flexibility to edit those colors and exposure in post. But if that's not a big issue and you still want to take advantage of C-Log 2 but are struggling to stare at the log profile on the back of the LCD, having this LUT baked in is a great option and just makes everything so much easier. But if you decide to record in the 8K RAW or the 4K RAW, you can have this setting on, but it actually won't bake into the video file. So you get the best of both worlds. You can actually see what the final image is going to look like on set, with the flexibility of still having all the integrity and ability to edit that file in RAW in post. And the big reason why I actually decided to go with the Canon R5 Mark II over something like the C80 or the C400 was because this camera has the ability to take amazing photos. As a full-time filmmaker, of course, 90% of my projects are going to be video focused, but there are times every now and then where I'm paid to actually do some photos as well. And so the fact that this camera has both options made it more attractive to me than going for the C80 or C400, where I'm stuck to only using that for video projects. So the ability to take amazing high quality 45 megapixel photos was really attractive to me and made this camera pretty much a no-brainer. So if you're a filmmaker who needs the hybrid capabilities of a photo and video camera, then the Canon R5 Mark II will not disappoint. Now, it's not all rainbows and sunshines with the Canon R5 Mark II. If you want to know some of its biggest flaws and potential deal breakers for filmmakers, then you can check out my video on that here. Are you thinking about getting the Canon R5 II? And if so, what draws you to it the most? Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. I appreciate every single one of you who do, and I'll see you in that next video. Peace.